Hello, and welcome to our 2017 webinar series, fourth installment, Employment Services for Immigrants. My name is Tara McGuire, and I'm with Heartland Alliance's National Initiatives on Poverty and Economic Opportunity. On behalf of National Initiatives and our presenters, we are very pleased that you are joining us today. Before we begin, a few housekeeping points. Everyone listening to the webinar is muted. You can use the chat box on your control panel, as pictured on the slide, to send questions for panelists at any point during the webinar. We will receive them and direct them to the appropriate presenter to answer during our Q&A session. You can type questions into the chat box at any time. The Q&A will occur at the end of the webinar. If there are any questions we don't get to, we will try to answer them via email afterwards. The slides and recording will be available on our website after today's webinar as well. And finally, we'll be using the hashtag #JobsForImmigrants with the number 4 in the middle. So please join us in tweeting about the webinar and use our hashtag. We have a great group of speakers today. I'll be handing it off to them shortly so that they can tell us more about providing employment services for immigrants and program and policy solutions to the challenges of doing so. And first, here is a little introductory material about us, Heartland Alliance's National Initiative on Poverty and Economic Opportunity. We are dedicated to ending chronic unemployment and poverty and work at the intersection of practice, policy, and research to catalyze change that is practical, informed by evidence, and grounded in the experiences of providers and advocates across the country. Our initiatives include the National Transitional Jobs Network, the National Center on Employment and Homelessness, which houses our Connections Project work, highlighted in recent webinars. And we also recently published a report on integrating rapid rehousing and employment services, which you can download for free on our website, and which will be the subject of another webinar, June 15th. But for now, onto the current webinar. We have 3 speakers today, and I will give a little biographical information on each of them before turning it over to them. Silvia Jane is the Director of Workforce Development and Adult Education at the National Council of Raza. She has over 10 years of experience in conducting labor market research and utilizing that to design and implement innovative workforce development and adult education programs. During her time at NCLR, Ms. Jain has helped over 100 CBOs implement innovative workforce development programs and expanded the NCLR workforce development programs. Prior to joining NCLR, Ms. Jain worked at the Women's Union in Boston, Massachusetts, and United Nations, India. While at the Women's Union, Ms. Jain conducted labor market research to help identify job training opportunities in the non-traditional sector for low-income women. Ms. Jain has co-authored a number of different reports and policy papers discussing the role of sector initiatives in job training programs serving low-income women. At United Nations, Ms. Jain works specifically with UNICEF, India and International Labour Organization, ILO, India. At UNICEF India, Ms. Jain conducted evaluation of the Government of India funded program on health and sanitation. And at ILO, Ms. Jain conducted research on employment and business opportunities for low-income women in the unorganized garment industry. Ms. Jain is a member of the DOL Career One-Stop Workforce Advisory Group. She has also served as a board member of the Chicago Women in Trades from 2009 to 2013, and the Alumni Board of Heller School for Social Policy and Management from 2010 to 2014. Ms. Jain also volunteers her time with national and international organizations to help design innovative training programs and conduct program evaluation. Ms. Jain holds a Master of Arts degree in Sustainable International Development from Brandeis University, Massachusetts, and a Bachelor of Science in Economics from Purdue University in Indiana. Daniel Loftus worked extensively in Latin America between 1986 and 1993, including 2 years in Belize, where he played an integral role in the accreditation of a newly opened high school. After returning to the United States in 1994, Loftus taught bilingual education at Round Lake High School and chaired a curriculum development committee in this predominantly Latino community. In 1997, with the support of the Jesuits and the Pilsen Project, Loftus opened Poder, formerly Loyola Center, to meet the growing need for greater educational opportunities for the adult immigrant community in Chicago. Through his leadership, Poder's organizational budget has grown by over 2,000% in 18 years, enabling Poder to empower over 10,000 Latino immigrants in language and job training programs. In response to unacceptable retention numbers during the recession, as individuals were unable to commit to classes due to dire economic situations, Loftus went to work looking for a solution. In 2011, he founded Oprima One LLC, a revenue-generating social enterprise call center. Wholly owned by Poder, Oprima One offers transitional employment to students and Spanish-English lead gen and customer support to third-party clients. Apart from Poder and Oprima One LLC, Loftus is an active member of the literacy and workforce development communities in Chicago, having served on various committees and boards, including the Resurrection Project, Hispanic Literacy Council, Chicago Nonprofit CEO Forum, the City of Chicago Community Development Advisory Committee, NCLR Workforce Development Committee, and LULAC. Additionally, from 2008 to 2013, Loftus dedicated part of his time to the Loyola University Chicago School of Education's Cuba Project as a non-government organization, NGO, management consultant. Twice per year, he traveled to the island to organize professional development conferences for hundreds of emerging Cuban NGO entrepreneurs. Loftus lives in Chicago with his wife and 3 children. And Judy Lai has over 10 years of experience in workforce, and her longevity in this field speaks volumes about her passion, interest, and success in transitioning adult learners into gaining the essential soft and hard skills needed to earn a livable wage. As a director of workforce, her role at Erie House involves daily management of the Pathways to Success, Adult Education, and Work Readiness Bridge programs, building partnerships with potential employers, community organizations, and funders, as well as providing leadership to the workforce team. Coming from a first-generation immigrant family, Judy was the first in her immediate family to obtain an undergraduate degree and the first of her entire family to obtain a graduate degree. Judy's never-ending desire is to bring the knowledge she gained back to her community and towards refugee rights. She holds a Master of Science in Public Service and a Master of Arts in Political Science, both from DePaul University. And yeah, with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you, Tara. This is Silvia Jane at the National Council of Raza, and I want to make sure that I give you all a quick overview of NCLR before we begin sharing experiences and talking with our panelists, Judy and Daniel. So for those of you who don't know, NCLR is the largest Hispanic civil rights advocacy organization in the U.S. We've been in existence for 49 years and we'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary next year. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to improve and increase economic opportunities for Latinos. Throughout the webinar today, we will be using Latinos and Hispanics interchangeably. NCLR consists of 2 distinct teams, our policy work and our program work. Our program components include education, health, housing, community development, and workforce development. We have parallel arm on our policy team that corresponds to all our program work. We exclusively work through a network of community-based organizations that are membership dues-paying organizations known as NCLR affiliates. Next, please. And these, if you'll see on the map, we have about 260 organizations that are affiliated with NCLR, and they're all across the country. Daniel at Poder and Judy at Erie Neighborhood House. Both of these organizations are NCLR affiliates that serve Latinos and providing them a number of different programs. Today, we hope to discuss what services you can provide to the immigrants and Latino population. Daniel and Judy will both share their experiences in the work they've been doing and expanding on their successful program models, their best practices, and sharing some pitfalls to avoid so you don't have to repeat those. At the end, we'll be taking questions, but please feel free to send them so we can incorporate them in our talking points as we go along. With this, we'll move on to Daniel and Judy. So Daniel and Judy, can you share a little bit about your workforce development and adult education background, how you got into this work, and what keeps you going since you have both been working in this field for a few years now?
Sure. This is Judy from Erie Neighborhood House, and thank you for the introduction, Tara, as well as Surabhi for sharing information about NCLR. So I became involved in workforce development more than 10 years ago, working specifically with laid-off workers, union workers, and ex-offenders. I entered the field because, in all honesty, it aligned with my public service degree, as well as my personal interest in serving marginalized communities and specifically working in nonprofit social service community settings. At that time, though, I wasn't 100% sure or aware of what workforce development meant. And I think that many times it is an abstract term for a lot of people. I think my love for workforce is actually about defining it for everyone. And what I mean by that is when I see specifically Erie participants confidently say, I am in training to become a medical assistant or machine operator, and that pride that shines through, that is a self-defining moment in itself defines workforce. Because I think reaching your dream or your dream job or career is truly a self-defining moment. And I think workforce plays a huge role in that.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, so for me, I came at it more from the adult ed kind of angle initially. I was born and raised in Chicago, but as Tara mentioned in the bio, so I spent a lot of time, almost 10 years at a fairly impressionable age in Latin America, including some time in the border of the Dominican Republic and Haiti. So I remember arriving there about 16 years old, at that time not knowing a lick of Spanish, and most individuals in this town didn't know any English. And, you know, while I had my work to perform during the day, and I think we did that pretty well, I found myself at night retreating. I mean, literally going back to my room and finding some space and putting some music on and a Walkman, just so I can kind of date myself a little bit for those of you that know what that is. But through that process, becoming increasingly isolated, right? And I think there were probably some stages almost of a depression that start to set in. So from that age of about 16, suffering through those moments of feeling like I was all alone and couldn't communicate with the outside world, I developed clearly a very profound appreciation for language. Poder, the name of the organization, is a Spanish word for power. And we're committed to English first. As I found through my own experience of, the number of doors that open, the number of experience that I've personally encountered, the relationships I've forged, all these things have continued to present day, started with that appreciation for language. And so for us, what started as English first, over time evolved into more of a workforce development program.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. We will now move on to organizational background. So Daniel, I'll start with you. Can you share a little bit more information about Poder and the programs you offer?
Certainly. So if we want to advance Tara's slide. Or two. But just to walk you through, so we're an organization that started almost 20 years ago now. We consider ourselves an immigrant integration center with sort of a threefold mission. First and foremost, being promote human dignity. We feel like the individuals that we're serving, recent immigrants to Chicago, have endured a lot. We want to build up the core of the individual first. Part two of the mission is the increased employment potential, a big motivation behind the students coming to us. and number 3 being this facilitation of and greater participation in the larger community. But as I mentioned, so for me, because of my own background, English came first. So Tara, if you advance to the next slide. For the first 10 to 12 years of our program, this is what it looked like. We had 6 levels of English as a second language. Over time, we integrated more civics and computer training. We also identified students who were coming to us who were motivated to learn English. But if you look towards the bottom of this flow chart, we also identified that. So we partnered with the Mexican consulate here in Chicago to offer what's called a Plaza Comunitaria. So through the Secretary of Public Education in Mexico, we're able to offer a primary school, elementary school diploma, understanding that if we're able to raise the initial literacy rate of our students in their native language, we're going to accelerate the second language acquisition. And then at the top part of the flow chart, you have a different access point for those who either are literate in the first language or already speak English. There's an opportunity to enter into Word and Excel, sort of more accelerated computer classes or more advanced English classes.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to Judy. Judy, can you also share information about Erie Neighborhood House and the programs you offer?
Sure, absolutely. So hopefully the next slide will show up, in which I can share about Erie Neighborhood House. It started off as a settlement house back in the late 1800s. So this is our 147th anniversary. And the initial mission was to assist immigrants into acclimating to Chicago, the culture, the surroundings. Now we've moved to serve primarily low-income Latino families. We also expanded to 4 sites, our main location in Westtown, 2 locations in Westtown, 1 in Little Village, and a charter school also in the Westtown area. So through skills building, access to critical resources, advocacy, and collaborative action are some of the programs that we have to help move and promote a just inclusive society and strengthening the income for low-income immigrants. Some of the departments that we have and some of the programs within those departments in the next slide carries a cradle to careers philosophy, which ranges anywhere from childcare services, after-school programs, ESL ABE, community literacy, housing, family advocacy, citizenship and immigration services, and then workforce services. The workforce department was created in 2007, so it is one of the younger programs within Erie House. And the reason for that is because workforce is seen and should be seen as the last stop for many of our participants or their parents within Erie. We noticed that a lot of our participants in ESL and ABE do have a thirst for either obtaining their dream job or a career, that there's a percentage of them who want to increase their language acquisition skills to be able to communicate with, let's say, the local school that their children go to. But there's also a percentage who want workforce services such as training, job search skills, and assistance with job placement.
Great, thank you so much, Judy. Daniel, I will go back to you. So you said Poder started out as an ESL provider. At what point did you realize that you also needed to get into workforce training? And why did you get into the training that you did?
Yeah, no, so it's a good question. I was thinking about that. I think for us, it goes back probably 7 or 8 years ago. We had a few critical sort of student as a result organizational challenges. But I think when I look back at the evolution of Poder, it comes down to really 3 problems. One, Tara alluded to this in the bio, was retention. We were at about 62% retention at the time, which was not bad, but we could clearly see based on the inconsistency that our students were encountering work and the shifts that were changing. They were dropping out at an increasingly higher rate. We also were looking at the acquisition rate of the English language. It was at 74% of the time. but we were struggling with the fact that most of our students, because they were living in Spanish-speaking communities, the only time they were exposed to the English language was here at Boulder. We clearly knew that even though we have a fairly intensive program, we're talking about 2 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week, it's certainly not sufficient to acquire the language. And then third, it was about revenue. The state of Illinois is not in the best of situations in terms of a budget and financing of programs like ours. So as we were moving forward, we felt like we needed to figure out a way, for one, could we feasibly employ students or eliminate that number one retention barrier, which was work conflicts, eliminate that for students? Could we create employment, transitional employment type opportunity that also exposed them to more English, so that the time they were here was not just 2 hours, maybe 4, 6, 8 hours a day? And then finally, if we were creating this wish list, we're like, all right, we want to generate some revenue. So stumbled upon sort of the idea first, but realized that our students weren't necessarily ready to engage in a work-study type program. And I'll talk a little bit about the model. But Sarah, if you advance 2 slides, you look at what we did first, which was to make certain that we created as well-rounded, sort of a holistic focus as possible. So while English as a second language, English language acquisition is a key component, continued to be first and foremost, we wanted to make certain that we were intentional with standards and competencies for each one of these other skills. And we felt like if somebody's going to more actively participate, whether it be in society or the workforce, they needed to possess these skills. So we tasked our teachers with taking a grammar lesson and integrating at least 1 or 2 of these other skills. And so just give you a quick example of what we did. So rather than sort of the old school approach in language of conjugating the verb to be, we instead said, let's use it to introduce personal introductions. So whether you're talking about a life skill, whether you're talking about a job skill, introduce yourself. So rather than saying, I am, you are, he is, we're now introducing myself. I am Daniel. My name is Daniel. And while I'm doing that, I'm also focusing on my eye contact, my handshake, my body posture, whatever other signals I might be sending to that other individual, which are as important as whatever's coming out of my mouth. Those are the things that we wanted to be able to target within our English classes and then ultimately be able to measure. So once we were able to establish that and develop some of these other skills, that's when we then moved on to the work study or transitional employment. So Tara, if you advance to the next slide, please. So first and foremost, what we did is we targeted the community. We were looking to establish an outsourced call center. So for companies that didn't have the lead generation, the customer support in Spanish, they could contract our students to provide that, first and foremost in Spanish. So we sent out these flyers saying, hey, if you're looking for employment, but you don't yet speak English, there's opportunities for you with El Primo Uno. So that was step 1, make certain we were figuring out, okay, how many of the folks that we were serving or could potentially serve were eligible to work and interested in working in a call center environment like this. And then the next step, if you advance to the next slide, was to connect up with businesses that needed that support. So we worked both here in the U.S., locally in Chicago, as well as internationally for different companies, providing that remote access and the ability to connect to more Latino customers in Spanish. So finally, one last point on what I talked about. So when trying to address the 3 main issues that we were confronting in terms of the retention rate, the acquisition rate, the revenue. You just advance to the next slide, please. See quickly that what it was about for us was creating a program that advanced the mission. I get tired of people talking about mission creep, but instead saying, how do we create programs at the end of the day are advancing what our core services are? So for us, although the scale is limited, we're talking about a student retention rate that went from 62 to 92. Now folks are with us 8 hours a day, 6 of which are paid on the phones. The acquisition rate, because they're slowly being introduced to more English calls, goes from 74 to 91%. We've created a pathway to the mainstream workforce, 100% placement, 96% in 180 days. And then I think almost as important as any of these other numbers, we've connected our folks, our students to the market. We're not asking them to wait 2 years to be eligible for workforce programs or to be placed in a job. We're saying we're going to market your Spanish speaking ability now. We're going to pay you for those services. In the meantime, you're going to develop these other skills.
Great, thank you. That was very helpful. Judy, I know Erie Neighborhood House has been doing workforce training for many, many, many years. What has changed in the last 10 years in terms of the services that you've been providing? And what do your workforce programs look now? So essentially, what has the evolution of workforce at Erie Neighborhood House look like?
Sure. Workforce is constantly evolving. An up-and-coming labor market industry may be non-existent in 10 years. I also hear that social media sites such as LinkedIn are taking over the place of resumes. And so with these facts, I think as workforce professionals, we always need to be aware and alert of the ebb and flow of this field in general. I think that within these past 10 years, even our bridge program went through some significant changes in terms of evolving the lesson plans, the contextualization of it, to bringing in new bridge programs and also taking some out that may not be as popular anymore. So, for example, something that was recently shared by the Pew Institute cited that robotics and technology put a massive number of jobs at risk. And so something that workforce professionals we need to do is to help gear up and train for this. So whether it's equipping people with the hard skills to help these sort of robots function, increasing our participants' soft skills, such as critical thinking skills that computers, machines, or robots may not have that kind of mechanism built into them. Nurturing human skills is something that those new forms of technology isn't able to do either, are some components that we started adding in to our bridge program and training on, particularly, like I said, those critical thinking soft skills. So I guess one trend is to always be on the lookout and align with labor market statistics, but going a little bit deeper and looking at the flip side as well. If labor market statistics are hurting our participants, then what can we do to make sure that they are still competitive going against these, machines, robotics, whatnot. Something else is, namely our healthcare bridge program. Many people immediately cite healthcare as either an up-and-coming industry or a very stable field. But for example, LPNs are being replaced by medical assistants in hospitals all across the Chicagoland area. So this is something I don't think was fathomable about 15 years ago. And as a result, we need to always be on the lookout as to what may then replace medical assistants. Something else that we should look at too is all those LPNs then that are being laid off and asked to be replaced by medical assistants. That's a target group that we can then conduct outreach to. So to speak to that, gentrification, I know I'm saying the gentrification word is so common now, but I think a lot of workforce agencies are struggling with outreach. And so looking internally at any sort of training program that workforce agencies does in-house, maybe there's a target population that we're not looking into that's suffering as a result of these industry changes. Something else in response maybe to the political environment right now is alongside of healthcare, community navigators is another really popular allied healthcare field. What they do is they assist with insurance questions and help people sign up for insurance. I know that may change even more based on the future of the Affordable Care Act. So it's something that's a good short-term training for many of our folks who want to dip their feet into healthcare, maybe on the administrative end versus patient care. Something else, for example, are a lot of the participants we see are interested in certified nursing assistants as a very first step to segue into nursing positions. And it's good to introduce these community navigator positions to them because they are also considered entry-level positions. There's a need for bilingual community navigators to go into those Spanish-speaking communities, to serve as counselors, check in with people in their homes after surgery. And this is also as a response to the changes in our healthcare insurance due to more physicians needing to have accountability. And I think that these changes and trends in at least the labor market statistics is all about exposing our participants to these different notions, knowing what's out there, and always being kept abreast ourselves as to what to educate them on. Something else I also want to touch upon in regards to changes I foresee coming, as well as the past 10 years, is there's now a new generation of workforce known as Generation Z, who were born in the mid-1990s to about 2010. That's debatable, I understand. These people will be our incoming workforce in the next 5 to 10 years. And they are vastly different from the baby boomers and also different from millennials. They also outnumber them in the workforce arena. And these include immigrant youth right now, DACA youth. And how we should approach this incoming workforce group is to educate ourselves on how to best serve this population. Something that was shared recently in a Tribune article is that these Generation Z folks are people who lived through the recession, and they have a completely different set of work ethics. And what I mean by that is they like to wear multiple hats within a company, and they are also motivated by pay, but also willing to put in the extra hours, the extra work to earn that pay. So we need to gear up these opportunities and expose either current high school students, high school dropouts, DACA youth, college dropouts to training programs that can lead to careers where people don't mind relocating. That's another trend with Generation Zers. People don't mind working overtime, as well as they could see the pathway. This group, this generation is also more entrepreneurial. So potentially a small business training bridge program or small business workshop will be very helpful to this emerging workforce population, is another trend that I see.
Great, thank you for sharing that information. So for both of you, Judy and Danielle, and maybe Danielle, you want to go first so we can give Judy a break. What do you guys see as unique challenges that you face with the immigrant population that you serve? And what are the challenges they wouldn't face if they were not an immigrant? So, you know, if they were born and brought up in the United States or have lived here all their life, would you be able to sort of compare and contrast what challenges they face and what sort of the unique pieces that they also bring to the table?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think first and foremost, one of the reasons we tackled language is because that's a unique challenge. We serve, as I mentioned, so Latino immigrants. So all of our students are recent arrivals, recent immigrants whose native language is Spanish. So I think the first thing that we need to adjust in terms of workforce providers is extending sort of the commitment to the individual. We're not talking about a quick fix. We're not going to establish his language skills in 6 months, might not even be 12 months. For the most part, if a student comes in and an intro or level 1, they're going to be with us for close to 2 years. And then some, right? If you're talking about accent reduction, you're trying to go into an English-speaking only type environment in the workforce, it's going to take a long time to reduce that accent. Documentation is another big one. You know, the only folks that we specifically ask about documentation are those that are looking for employment services or looking to potentially work for us on the phones in prima uno. But for everybody else, we have to address it. But what we've been trying to do is figure out, you know, where they are on a particular scale. So that can start with a temporary ID, you know, municipal ID, a matricula from the consulate, sort of a special identification from Mexico or their country of origin. All those things need to be addressed and sort of help people enter into the workforce, but it's certainly something that the majority of or nobody who's born in this country would have to face. And I think although not necessarily unique to the immigrant population, it's the diversity of background. I mean, we see people with significantly different levels of education, of work experience. You know, in our Blessed Comunitaria, we're working with adults on how to properly hold a pencil or a pen as they're getting ready to work on the alphabet and their literacy, up to an individual who we have here, part of our transitional job program, who is a hydroelectric engineer in Honduras. So that runs the gamut, and that definitely creates challenges. But for us, the key is then creating, you know, proper expectations, long-term goals, and then making certain, though, also, you know, human nature tells us we want to see some incremental gains. We want to meet certain milestones. So clearly laying out during career counseling sessions, one-on-one check-ins, the progress that people are making, rather than simply saying, hey, 2 years, 3 years, you're going to be where you need to be. No, every couple months, let's make certain we're demonstrating progress, not only to the student, but to staff, and then certainly external audience in terms of funders or other people that support our work.
Great, thank you. Judy, what would you say are the challenges that you face when you serve your immigrant population?
There are a few challenges. If we're talking simply about knowledge, I do see that there's a lack of financial literacy skills, namely amongst immigrant youth. Most immigrant parents or families don't trust banks, and the reason is because many of them fled their home country due to corruption and financial turmoil. So as a result, when we see our younger participants getting their first paycheck, they honestly don't know what to do with it. And they don't want to bother their families and try to get knowledge internally. So something that I think can be considered is exposing or educating our participants with financial literacy training. So in addition to the usual workforce soft skills, such as resume, interviewing, cover letters, this is a key piece that I see missing in some of that soft skills workshop, soft skills training. Something else is case management services that pertain to counseling, and counseling that engages the entire family. Because there is a sense of guilt, especially for DACA youth, because now they have work visas, but nobody else in their family is eligible for it. And as a result, there's this fear of success. There's this fear of success that they would then affect their siblings who are envious of the fact they have a work visa. A variety of thoughts flow through them. So if possible, something that should be done is to ask the family members to attend orientation alongside of participants for any workforce program. Maybe even starting up an alumni event, a participant breakfast, invite your family so that the family can see what those participants are doing, what kind of career paths are out there for them, why are they gone, 4 nights a week, going to the training program, because it's hard to explain. And I think those feelings of guilt play a large role in that. Something else is there is a tendency for immigrants to box themselves in, and what I mean by that is we tend to follow a lot in our parents' footsteps. So if there's a family member who was a foreman at a manufacturing company, and that job helped to pay for everything for the entire family, helped to put the kids through school, whatnot, helped to put food on the table, that is a safe job, and that's a job that then you should also go into as you reach that working age. But I think that that's the boxing in mentality that we need to teach and help our immigrants, especially immigrant youth, probably walk a little bit away from. You could still work in that manufacturing company, and that is still a great company to work for, but there are other positions in there. And there may be some pathways that can then lead to managerial positions that your family members didn't have access to because they were still at that fairly stable, but it was $10 an hour, $11 an hour positions with no career ladders, no career pathways. So educating them about that. Something else, and this is a unique challenge based on, again, the current political environment, is that there's a deep fear among workers now in terms of losing their job, thus losing their health insurance, or losing their jobs due to their status, their immigration status. And these are people who may not be confident with job search right now. They are not going to take that risk and enter into sort of any sort of post-secondary training program, thinking about a dream job or career that they initially want to go into, but now don't want to take that risk. They want to stay put, but they are also hungry to increase their knowledge and education for job security. So something that we can do is then bring the training on site. Bring the ESL classes on site. This would, of course, need employer cooperation, but it's also then educating the employers. Have you ever surveyed your workforce? How many of them can move up, and why are they not? If it's soft skills, hard skills training, collaborating with a workforce agency to bring those education partners in and train the current workforce to help alleviate those fears.
Great, thank you for sharing. So Judy, just going back to you, I think you alluded a little bit to this when you talked about financial literacy, but can you talk a little bit more about the programs that you offer for new immigrants versus first and second generation and how they differ?
Sure. So if Tara can please go to the next slide and the slide over. Okay, thank you. So something that I think I want to point out is the services for new immigrants aren't drastically different than any job seeker. They will still need those job readiness workshops, advanced training, access to job leads. One thing I do suggest is for new immigrants is to be as honest as possible. And I know this is, something that's, very common sense. But what I mean by that is with new immigrants, they come with a need or yearn for people to tell them this is what you'll get at the end, because they've been disappointed in the past. They've had a lot of doors shut on them in the past. And so the end goal needs to be job placement. I'm going through your healthcare bridge program. I'm going through your supply chain logistics program, this technology program. That's all part of our workforce department programs within Erie. But if the end goal is not going to get me that job, and what are those wages in that job? Can it support my family so that it takes time away from them for me to get this kind of training, is what we need to be upfront and honest about. What I think is we need to stop labeling immigrants in the very beginning that, they're vastly different from the other job seeker who may not be an immigrant or a new immigrant. Yes, there may be a need for, stronger case management, namely the counseling I talked about, to assist with extended family needs, emotional needs, but the same caliber of training and opportunity needs to be given to immigrants just like any other participant we serve in workforce.
Great, thank you. And Danielle, do you guys offer programs for new immigrants and first, second generation immigrants, and how do they look? What are some of the similarities and what are some of the differences?
Yeah, I think I'd echo what Judy said, that most of our programs, are open certainly to all. The majority of our students that enroll are recent immigrants, in the fact that about 80% enrolled in our English classes, one of the 6 levels. But I think the key is, regardless of where the person has come from, to make certain that there's a significant investment on the front end, on the intake side of making certain that we know, okay, this is the clear starting point of this individual. These are the skills they bring. I mean, I mentioned earlier about language being, an obstacle, but what we've tried to do is quickly turn that around and say this is an asset, right, of making certain that we're not putting students into positions where Spanish is not preferred, or ideally where Spanish is required. And now that what may have initially been somewhat of a liability, their inability to speak English, is now turned around as a clear positive. And we see, through the numbers, we're talking about an immediate return on investment. As soon as that individual, especially if they're coming with, some educational background in their native country, some work experience in their native country, now we're going to see a 30 to 40% increase in their wages, just because of the fact that now they've acquired the English language. So I think what's key, whether we're talking about a student entering into an adult basic education program, entering into one of our English levels, or more advanced computer classes, or even the transitional employment, is just identifying where somebody is, clearly identifying their goals, and as I mentioned earlier, monitoring and rewarding and tracking all those milestones in between.
Great, thank you. So, sticking with you, Danielle, what role do employers play in your program? And are they involved in improving opportunities for immigrants? Do they want to play a role in that capacity? So just talk a little bit more about, employer integration into your program. Sure.
No, I mean, if an employer isn't interested in getting engaged in your program, especially if you're serving Latino immigrants, then their future is probably not all that rosy. I mean, we're talking about the buying power at 1.5 growing $1 trillion in the United States alone. And so they are looking to increase diversity, ultimately looking to better connect, at least in our case, the Latino population here in Chicago. So we look at them first and foremost as a resource. And when I say resource, we're talking about people and the employees as volunteers, as trainers, as guest speakers. I'm thinking back, we've had some conversations with McDonald's recently, and we were going through a customer service training program, and we asked their HR manager, who manages a few of the local stores or restaurants here around one of our sites. The person came in, her name was Araceli. She told the story of starting out as a maintenance worker, cleaning the lobby, cleaning the restaurant, had been promoted to manager, ultimately became the lead HR person for these restaurants. Now, not only did she come in and provide tremendous information in terms of workplace etiquette that may have been different for some students coming from different countries, but it was an extremely, relatable and inspirational story that our students need to see more and hear more. And at the same time, like I said, for the organization, she provided a great service. We don't have that level of expertise. She was able to provide it. And the other part I'd say in terms of a resource are the corporate dollars. And conversation yesterday with an employer who's looking to ramp up. They're looking to add 100 jobs. They have a pain point. I mean, recruiting and hiring individuals is extremely expensive. And I think, they came to us because there's a need and we can address it. But in return, we should expect something. We're going to get somebody halfway there. We're not going to invest all this money in an individual, train them, and ultimately, sure, we want to place them, but there also has to be an investment from that corporation, from that business to help support these services. And if you explain properly, if you position your organization properly, they'll get it and they will invest. So I think that's, comes back to us of making certain that we're selling our services and we're expecting more from employers.
I agree. I think that's a great point. We definitely need to capitalize on the corporations that are looking and hurting for the individuals to be at their organizations, working for them, representing the customer base that they're going to be serving, and especially tapping into the bilingual, bicultural aspect of our immigrant population that they bring to the table. So Judy, similar question for you. What role do employers play in your program, and how are they involved in ensuring you have successful workforce programs?
Sure. I personally think that Chicago-based employers are on board. I think that the majority of them are willing to take risks, be innovative, and they want to hire. They do recognize the foreseeable hiring gap and shortages with baby boomers retiring, and a lot of them want bilingual Spanish-English workers. I think that I can speak to Erie's experience with our employer connections, namely healthcare. One healthcare employer that I think is doing a wonderful job is Advocate. And what I mean by that, defining that wonderful job, is that what makes them unique is that they actually have a workforce manager on board who scouts for talent. So it's a little bit different than, let's say, human resources talent acquisition specialist. They actually have this workforce manager go on site to many community organizations that may have healthcare training, healthcare bridge training, and they educate participants on how to apply for advocate jobs, what the culture is there, what to prepare for, little tips and tricks on how to bypass the first interview, let's say. So when I see that, I really think that Chicago is a good place that has these kind of employers, and not just Advocate. There are a few out there that I also know of who is willing to do that, that they know where the participants are and they come in to meet with them instead of the other way around. In other field of employers who we've worked with in the past in response to our former manufacturing bridge program is a manufacturing company located in Skokie by the name of Woodward. They have a training program called the GEM training program. And what they do is they go into high schools. Their target population is our youth. So they go into high schools and they recruit the next generation of machine operators. They recruit the Generation Zers I was talking about before. And what they do is they assist with the cost of training, whether it's books or maybe even some of the partial costs of the training education program at Oakton Community College, while the students work part-time on site at their company. So this is another great model because it's combining the on-the-job training that is a really common catchphrase in workforce alongside of the in-classroom training, but with an employer that's wholly on board. They're part of the in the classroom training, and they're also part of the on-the-job training. And the reason for that is because they recognize the need to hire more workers in the future, and they want to provide youth an opportunity to expand on their career with hands-on training. They invest in their workforce. So that's something I think more employers hopefully can replicate, and many in Chicago are doing a good job with.
Great, thank you. That's excellent information. So can both of you also talk a little bit about services that are available for individuals that are not legally permitted to work in the United States and how they might be able to support themselves and their families? So what are some job options for them, whether that's small business, whether that's self-employment? What does that look like, and how can our listeners and audience sort of better serve that population? So we'll start with Daniel and then move to Judy.
Great. I wanted Judy to go first on this one, but that's fine. I will take it. It's a tough question, and it's something that we continue to try to address and struggle with periodically. But one of the things that we've settled on is using sort of an employability metric, a job readiness scale. As I mentioned before, and you're talking about now, documentation is part of that. We weight it, so out of 20 points, we put it at 4, for example, just to give you a real concrete example. So there are ways for people to move up on that scale. So what might be a 0, if we're talking about an undocumented individual, if they're able to get an ID from their local consulate, I might value that at 1 point. If they file for an ITIN, which is now they're paying their taxes, even though they may not have a Social Security number that's valid and they're working under, that can be worth another point. They could get a municipal ID. Chicago's talking about this and may be available in other cities, all the way up to citizenship. But I mention this because then you can take that, and it's not the end of the conversation. Sure, it might limit the number of opportunities that individual has, but we then put that number, whatever that total number is, which includes a lot of other factors, and then we talk about entry-level positions. Right? We talk about mid-level positions. We talk about high-level positions. And then with almost as importantly, as clearly outlining, okay, what is the type of position that might be available for an entry-level person, talking about how that person could theoretically move up. Now, we hope to prepare people so they're doing things the right way, and so that if and when we come to our senses and pass some sort of comprehensive immigration reform, they're well positioned. But we also understand that they have to put dinner on the table tonight. They have to make certain they're making a living so they can provide for tomorrow. And so we need to make certain that we're connecting them to the type of work, whatever that might be, at where they are, and not simply and only addressing the needs of the documented. It's extremely difficult. One of the things that we struggle with is, with particular partners, if and when we know about the legal status of a particular student, are we referring them to that partner, or are we being more careful, pulling back and making certain we're directing them in other, in other positions and other things that might be available? It's an ongoing battle. It's something we talk about a lot. I wish I had answers, but maybe during the Q&A, people can offer up a few suggestions.
Thank you. Judy, how do you guys help undocumented individuals be able to work or access services?
Sure. Erie recently launched a DACA and workforce program. So to clarify, DACA is a policy signed by the Obama administration in 2012 so that people who came into the country under the age of 31 as of June of 2012 as well as currently in school, graduate from high school, obtain a GED, and have not been convicted of a felony offense or misdemeanor is eligible for DACA, which would then provide a 2-year renewable work visa. The thing is that, and I think that Erie is aligned a little bit differently because we do have a citizenship and immigration department, we have workforce department, and we have our adult department that encompasses our ESL GED program. So looking at this population and the 3 departments that I talked about, how could we move these DACA youth participants into workforce? How can we move DACA eligible participants in our ESL classes into citizenship in a seamless way? So something that we've done is something that we did in the very beginning that helped us solidify our desire to combine DACA youth with workforce was we surveyed a lot of the DACA eligible and DACA renewal participants who came into Erie House. And we realized through our data review that the majority of them who now have work visas are still working at the same positions that they held prior to having a work visa. A lot of the hourly wage, minimum benefits, if any, minimum wage positions. And when we asked them, would you like to get into a training program? What is your dream job? What kind of training program do you want? Their response was always positive. You know, this is not where I want to be a few years down the road. So initially we started talking about workforce services to the Citizenship and Immigration Department during consultations. I'm sorry, have the Citizenship and Immigration staff members talk about workforce services during the consultations. And everybody was always interested. Yeah, I would love workforce, but they rarely approached our department. So we realized that we needed to approach them the other way around. We needed to then use that roster of people who said they were interested and approach them, not wait for them to come to us. And I think a lot of times that's the mentality within workforce, the notion that, you know, somebody has to want the job. Somebody has to want the training to be diligent in a workforce program. But we have to keep in mind that these are also people, new immigrants, DACA youth, that have different backgrounds, different perils that they've been through, and they may still want that job training, but afraid to take that first step, afraid to take that risk, because they've been taught at a young age, you know, don't take unnecessary risk because it could get your family into trouble. So we need to then reach out to them first. So that's one way that we've been working with undocumented or the potential for DACA visas is to approach them first. Don't wait for them to come to us. Also through this DACA workforce program, the collaboration with adult education services I mentioned is workforce used to go into ESL and ABE classes towards the tail end when they're about to graduate and talk about workforce services. We saw that, you know, there's a need, obviously. That's why the workforce program was started here at Erie, is that people say, you know, I want to learn English to get a job, to obtain a higher paying job. But when we went to conduct outreach and marketing about our program, we realized that maybe in a group of 50, only 1 or 2 were interested. And that was because of the status issue. They did not see workforce as being the light at the end of the tunnel. They saw it maybe as false hope, because I go through this bridge program, I go through this training, but in the end, how am I going to get that job? So instead of workforce going into those classes, we are asking citizenship team to go into those classes and do a thorough review of what those people are eligible for. Because a lot of times when we conduct DACA consultation, we also come to the conclusion that there's a pathway to citizenship for a percentage of those people that we consult. It could be visas, U visas, things of that nature. And so that's some of the I guess, learning components that we've done in the past. Is the population is there, the potential to, the pathway to work visas or citizenship is there, but it's the way that we approach them, the referral process that we need to work on so that we're making sure that we're catching everyone in our network.
Great, thank you so much. So we have a couple of minutes, and then I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. And I want to just ask one other question and then a closing question about strategy. So my next question for Judy and Daniel, and I don't care who goes first, is from the perspective of funding. And Daniel, I know you touched on this a little bit. What do funders need to do differently to fund programs that serve the immigrant population? And does that mean they need to be more involved? Does that mean the funding needs to look different? But how can we get the foundations, the corporations, individuals, basically the funding, the philanthropic community involved in serving this immigrant population?
I'll go first. So I would say, it starts with us in terms of the providers making certain that we're better communicating some of the issues that we're talking about during this call, and those are the challenges that our students are facing. This is not a quick fix, right? So if we're talking about a 2-year development cycle in terms of language, documentation, and going through a citizenship process, like Judy was talking about, could take even longer. We need more flexible funding, right? We need multi-year commitment. And, even with that, share a quick story. We had a 2-year commitment, a public source of funding. We have open enrollment and open exit in all of our programs. So we were enrolling people throughout year 1 all the way to the end of year 1. Well, rolling into year 2, there was no issue. We were able to say, these folks just enrolled in September. We're going to then look to place them in jobs, the following year in year 2 of the grant. Well, there was an assumption on our part that as we got towards the end of year 2, this funding would be renewed and we'd be able to resume this process of rolling individuals over. Instead, we're enrolling students in September, so the tail end of year 2 of the grant, and there was an expectation from the funder that somehow from September to December of that year, folks were going to develop English language skills, be placed in a job, and then somehow we'd have 60 days of on-the-job numbers to report back. Well, totally unrealistic. Shame on us for sort of accepting this commitment. Well, at the time, it was one of the largest grants we'd ever received, but being much more intentional and upfront about what are the needs of the community, what is it going to take to confront them, to overcome them, and not settling for this 12-month cycle, at least from our perspective and our student perspective, is totally unrealistic.
Thank you. Very helpful. Judy, any words of wisdom there?
Sure. I think that there's always a funding hot topic every 5 years or so. There's always a trend. Currently, that topic is opportunity youth. But I think at times funders are too focused on the growth area or the population that we should fund currently, and not whether or not the infrastructure is ready yet. So for example, if the grant is to assist opportunity youth into jobs, then there needs to be budget set aside for paid work experience, such as stipends, or a 3-month paid internship of some sort. And using the same example of opportunity youth, a lot of these folks may be young parents, may need to provide, and even if they're not supporting their own immediate family, even supporting their younger siblings, their own families. There are a lot of summer unpaid internship opportunities, but I'm going to be honest and say none of Erie's after-school youth participants are interested in those unpaid internships because they can't. I'm sorry, the interest is there, but they financially cannot. And so that's something that I think funders should consider is transitional jobs, stipends for youth or any sort of job seeker, because to commit to a 12-week bridge program and then maybe a 3 to 6 month post-secondary training, a lot of obstacles are along the way, and to have some sort of financial assistance would be really important for this group to keep on moving forward. Something else is that I was just to funders is don't reinvent the wheel. What I mean by that is there are countless participants who say, this is my 4th training program, this is my 2nd bridge program, this is my 3rd time at a workforce agency. And why are they back? It's because there's no end goal, that all the programs are maybe new in terms of maybe a new bridge program, a different time frame in regards to the training. But if in the end, the participant is not getting that connection to an employer, then they're back in that training program. They're back in that bridge program. and they feel like there's something they're doing wrong. Did I invest a year in the wrong field, and that's no longer up and coming field? Now I have to look at another bridge program then. Whereas I think what funders should do, and I do see this currently, at least for last fiscal year and this upcoming one, our funders need to engage not just the community organization, but employers be a part of that grant as a key partner. Also, advisory boards, advisory teams that have an in-depth industry knowledge about, let's say if it's a training program, also be a part of that collaborative. And then that group go in together on that grant so that there's then a holistic means for our participants to succeed and not repeat the same thing over and over again.
Great. So I'm looking at the clock. We have about 4 minutes, and then I want to open up for questions. So I'll give you both 2 minutes each. Daniel, I'll go back to you first. Your question is keeping yourself in the shoes of our audience members, and some of them might be just starting out serving the immigrant population. What are 2 things that they should keep in mind as they start out so that they can be successful? And what are 2 things that they should avoid doing so they don't run into the same challenges that you might have? So what can they learn from you in terms of a best practice and a challenge?
That's a good question. So I think the first thing that I would recommend is trying to figure out, I'm assuming by being part of this webinar, there's a clear identification of a need. So they've done sort of that initial needs assessment and a little bit of the demographics, potentially even all the way to an environmental scan. And there are plenty of groups that can sort of help with that kind of thing. But then I'd go more practically in terms of step 1 is to figure out, especially with everything that's going on nationally around immigration and all the empty rhetoric is probably a nice way of putting it, but the dangerous rhetoric, you have to figure out where the centers of trust are. And so in our community here in Chicago, most often that's the church, whether it be a Catholic church or any other denomination, and trying to establish relationships there first. Like Judy was talking about, the idea of taking programs to the work site, if that's something where people are comfortable, where there is some trust there, then potentially taking your classes there, and then you have a built-in sort of recruitment tool and a built-in audience for your programs. But for us, most successful has been going through the churches, establishing relationships, making certain that we're presenting our information, whatever programs that we're putting forth in the language of the target audience, making certain if we're going into a predominantly Spanish-speaking parish or church, that everything that runs in the bulletin, every announcement that's made is done in Spanish. And then reacting to the needs of the people. I mean, how do we develop that trust first, but then continually monitor the evolving needs of the participants? And I think with that, you'll ultimately have success.
Great, thank you. Anything they should keep in mind to avoid doing or pitfalls to avoid?
There are plenty. How much more time do we have? Why don't we do the do's first, and I'll give that a moment to think about the don'ts. Maybe Judy, you could take it from there.
Okay. Sounds fair. So addressing Surabhi's question about what not to do, and I mentioned this before, is don't label them, don't separate them. These are our immigrant job seekers, these are immigrant workforce participants, and these aren't. These are bilingual, these are Spanish speakers, because as I mentioned, in the end, a job seeker is a job seeker. And labeling them is going to be a disservice to them right from the start. So it definitely, so I do to that, that's something not to do, is not to, separate or label them as anything that's vastly different from a general job seeker, but to also then use former participants to help lift them. Case managers are great, but I think hearing it from somebody who been through the same program, been through the same, has a similar background, and then recognizing their pathway to success and having them serve as a mentor is a great way, and that speaks to building a community within a workforce program.
Great, thank you.
And I guess
Yeah, go ahead, Judy, if you had anything else.
the second no is don't assume that if they want the training, if they want the job readiness services, they'll come to you. I think that, and again, this is something I mentioned, that workforce programs tend to be a bit strict. You know, if you want the job, you have to then work for it. But if we're talking about the immigrant community, we have to keep in mind different cultures, different backgrounds, different journeys here. And so we need to approach them first. And then there needs to be a lot of follow up on our end so that that can assist them with their follow through.
Great, thank you. Both valuable points. Either Judy or Daniel, any parting thoughts? Anything else you'd like to share before we jump into questions?
Yeah, I think just quickly, one thing I would say is, you know, we talk about the don'ts of just not overcommitting, sort of overthinking too early. You know, too often people think, well, I can't offer services to a particular population because we don't have this huge capacity in that language. I think you can scale depending upon the need. I think if you had a volunteer, if you had an intern, someone, for example, who spoke Spanish, you don't need to translate all the materials. You have a dedicated person who can help put a flyer together, help make an announcement at a local, you know, church or whatever it might be, set up a voicemail box, make sure you have caller ID, because one thing we've learned is that people won't generally leave messages, but just have that dedicated individual who could then potentially walk people through your intake process, translating as you go. If there's a large need, well, now you've got the justification built in to hire somebody, and you can start to scale your program that way.
So one thing that just came to mind, and I wanted to see if you guys employ this strategy, do either of you have bilingual staff, and what role do they play in your program and retaining your program participants?
I can go first. There is a higher ratio of bilingual staff versus sole English speakers in the workforce department here at Erie. But I think that a lot of times during case management, and definitely during the bridge program, English is used as a primary language. And that speaks to, we understand that at the very end, our participants need to market themselves in English to employers. And so we want them to confidently communicate with us in that language. But we have staff on board who's able to speak both, because that is building that trust, that connection. I'm sure that any immigrant can attest to this, that when you see, feel, or hear somebody speaking your language, I think that there's an immediate sense of comfort, a sense of home, a sense of trust. And so that's why we have that mix.
Very helpful. Daniel, what has been your experience, especially, you know, given that you guys do so much more with ESL and maybe new immigrants?
Yeah, no, similar to Judy, I think, although we have essentially a policy in place that anybody that's, you know, customer facing, student facing, is bilingual. Everybody who, you know, from the instructors to folks who are in different roles sort of behind the scenes, it's certainly not a requirement, but we want to make certain that, especially during the current, you know, situation of anxiety and fear and everything else, that we're being as welcoming as possible. And as Judy said, a language is a quick way to make certain that people are comfortable getting the information they need, and then ultimately we hope taking advantage of the services that we offer.
Great. So I'm going to hand this back to Tara to see what questions we have, and we can start answering some of those questions and go from there.
Hello, everybody. This is Chris Warland with National Initiatives, and I am having a look at the questions that have been coming in from our attendees. I would encourage you, if you still have some questions, there's time left for you to type those into the question box and send them along to us. And in the meantime, I have a couple of questions here that have come in. I think that Each of these has been at least partially answered in the course of today's conversation, but I'll put them out there in case we have further comments. The first question that we received, I'll direct to Daniel, and it says, with PUTER, I understand that individuals do not have to speak English to find jobs, but do they need to have some sort of documentation? Would undocumented individuals qualify for this program, O Primo Uno?
That's a good question. No, so I talked in general terms about students who come to us looking for employment services. Specifically for O Primo Uno, we do ask for documentation. Students go through, who are part of the transition employment, through the I-9 verification process. And we make, we go through all those checks, or as many as we need to verify that information, to make certain that at the end of the day, we're protecting not only Primo Uno, but PUTER as an organization. So they do have to have legal work permission to participate in the work study.
All right, thanks very much. I have another question that I think either one of our panelists could take a shot at answering. It says, do you have any specific examples of using non-federal funds to support people without work authorization? Are there examples of this being done in partnership with WIOA Title II, for example, philanthropic or state funds to provide support services? I can go through that again. It's a little bit of a long question. It's about specific examples of using non-federal funds to support people without work authorization in partnership with WIOA, such as philanthropic or state funds to provide support services.
This is Surabhi. I can take a stab at what I've seen happen in other parts of the country, and then see if Daniel or Judy have anything to add to it. So one of the things I recommend organizations is to be creative about how they're using their federal dollars or state dollars or VOA dollars. So those of you who are receiving funding from VOA or the state dollars or federal dollars, you should not be asking for money on a per participant cost, because then you have to make sure you're able to verify the documents of that individual. However, if you were to ask money for an instructor, the government or the funding organization generally does not care if it's a documented or an undocumented individual that's sitting in that class. Now, granted, you wouldn't have a class of all undocumented individuals, but you are able to serve a few individuals that are undocumented through that process. So the same goes for case managers, the same goes for tutors, your staff time, your space cost, and all of those things. So I recommend looking at how you're asking for funding to be a little bit more creative and looking for overarching sort of trends and line items instead of being specific to just books or just per participant costs. And then secondly, I would say a lot of corporations, philanthropic dollars don't necessarily pose a restriction that are non-public dollars essentially don't necessarily pose a restriction to who can be served. So creating those funding opportunities is really helpful. The third thing is having an integrated service model for your programs is important, because you want to be able to assess the family as a whole. Many times the parents may not be eligible for any benefits because they're undocumented, but the kids might be eligible for benefits, and that might mean that the family is able to then as a whole access benefits. So you want to make sure you're assessing the entire family for opportunities that are available and the resources that they can tap to, whether that is looking at reduced lunch programs or SNAP benefits or other benefits that the kids might be eligible because they were born in the United States. And the last thing I want to touch upon just on employment is you want to definitely look at self-employment and small business development as a goal for getting these people jobs and helping them be part of the mainstream. because they can definitely get a tax ID number and start their businesses as long as they're paying taxes on that tax ID. So that helps them earn an income and also support the entrepreneurial spirit that many Latinos and immigrant populations come with. So with that, I'll stop, but Judy and Daniel, if you want to add something to this.
Something I do want to add is if we're talking specifically about WIOA, Title II funding does not specify that the enrollee needs to be documented. Title II funds is strictly pertains to adult education and training funds. So that's something to look into as well if you want to serve the undocumented immigrant population in some form of WIOA.
All right, great, thanks. So this is Chris once again with National Initiatives, and at this point we have not had any further questions come through in the chat box, so this is your last call. If you're listening in and there's a question on your mind that you'd still like to ask, you have an opportunity to do so now. And I'll continue to monitor the question box for as long as we remain online here. But with that, I think we can go ahead and open it up to any final comments that any of our panelists might have with regard to our topic today before we wrap it up.
Great, thank you. Judy, if you have any comments, and then Daniel, and then I'm happy to close this out.
Yeah, I do have one last comment, and it's just to keep in mind that immigrants are resilient. If there's one particular trait that I think many of them encompass, it is that resiliency, and they would rather you be honest about what your program can do versus what you hope to do. So to build that trust that both Daniel and I keep on going back to, it's important to attack that honesty and introduce that honesty in the very beginning, understanding that they would prefer that over, selling a program to them that's all stars and glory.
It's a really good point. So I'll just put in a plug for NCLR because I know Surabhi probably won't, but as a proud affiliate, one thing I would say is that there are a lot of really good resources out there. If you're looking to start a program or adapt a program that's going to better serve immigrants, I don't think there's, especially Latino immigrants, there's a better group than NCLR. We worked a number of years ago on some immigrant integration modules, which are fantastic, which you can bring in just about any program you might currently offer. Do a lot of things on know your rights. And I think one thing that's important is to make certain that every worker, regardless of their legal status or documentation, is entitled to the same rights. And I think that's something that many of the immigrants, the folks that we serve, don't always know. So it's also an opportunity as an organization to maybe sort of gauge the level of potential interest or need in your community by offering these type of resources, and then as a result or as a follow-up to make certain that people know about the other services that you provide.
Thank you for that plug, Daniel. And this is Surabhi, so I appreciate it. I think the last few things I would say is, you don't necessarily need to do anything specifically different for immigrants. You just need to be a little bit more intentional. You want to make sure you understand the circumstances they're coming from. They're eventually, here because they want to achieve that economic, that American dream, and they have probably left really hard circumstances back home and are in a harder situation being here, and many things are new to them. So just being understanding of the circumstances that they're coming from and coming into is helpful, and making sure that we find a way to connect them to the right opportunities. I think a lot of organizations end up creating programs that are unnecessary, and essentially if you're still going to place them in that $10 an hour job after the training program, you don't need to create that program. What you need to do is figure out a program that's going to help them move up the ladder or utilize their skills and get them into a better position from where they are right now. So just be intentional, just be careful about what you're creating, and you should be able to run fairly successful program models. And I think Chris will share our contact information. I'm happy to help any organization just get off the ground and share resources that we have, as Daniel said, and provide any technical assistance you might need to serve this population.
Okay, great. This is Tara again. Yeah, thanks so much to our speakers. Thanks everyone for joining our webinar today. The webinar recording and slides will be available on our website, and we'll also email them to you. And via email, we'll try to answer any questions we didn't have time to address today. And yeah, if you'd like to get in touch with any of the 3 speakers in the webinar, we have their contact information here, and it will be in the slides we emailed to you. And yeah, finally, here's a slide with some of our contact information, and we hope you'll keep in touch with National Initiatives. You can email us, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, sign up for our e-news, etc. And you can also learn more about our work on our website, which is www.heartlandalliance.org/national-initiatives. And yeah, finally, next month, June 15th, we'll be hosting another webinar on integrating rapid rehousing and employment. So please keep your eyes out for more information on this and our other resources. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.